thank you everyone for joining. I'm Melanie Kyles and I'm here in the Fashion Lab, which is my studio. So what I usually do from here is I teach embroidery and sewing and embellishment workshops. One of the things that I really love is I'm an embroidery specialist, and the thing that kind of drew me towards that is the fact that it sits between art, fashion and craft. And as somebody who loves all three, I was like, yeah, that's kind of the direction that I want to go. It's also one of the reasons why I really love the Bose Museum, because of their focus on craftsmanship and heritage as well as art and design. So it's a real honour to be doing this today. I'm also part of the Orbis steering group, which is in Commercial Union House, so that's all about sort of connecting communities and creatives through collaboration. And they've currently got a fundraiser on orbis.one if anyone does want to support a local independent business. Obviously this is the second live workshop as part of the Bout Art School for Bose Museum. Last week was Richard Bliss, another textiles artist, and he done his was a zine making workshop, which I think actually sits really well with this. So I'd recommend sort of watching Richard's video and actually potentially doing a bit of both, like actually having like a collage zine. I think would work really nicely. So going to be focusing on Saint Luke drawn the Virgin and Child. So it was painted by Derek Bouts in the 15th century, and Derek Bouts was one of the most influential painters of that time in the Netherlands. His paintings are quite rare, especially in the UK, so for Bose Museum to have this is really quite special, and it will be returning back later in the year if anybody wants to see it. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go over, so obviously talking about textiles and talking about embroidery, it's kind of looking at that intersect between art and design. So one of the things that I want to do with this is I'm going to talk about the 7 elements of art. Some of those do cross over, so I'm going to focus predominantly on the colour and composition, because I think that's a really nice intersect between art and design. But I am going to briefly go over them just so you have just a bit of general sort of knowledge about that. So 7 elements of design. So the first one's line. So line work. So obviously it's the basis of any kind of illustration work. Sort of curved lines like an artwork, it sort of symbolises movement. If you've got sort of more rigid geometric lines, that's more stability. And in here you can't really see, obviously it's kind of the lines that are in this painting kind of make up the form and they make up shape, so it's not kind of like singular lines. However, you can kind of see here how it's curved at the top, and at the bottom it's sort of really symmetrical. It kind of gives that grounding. So you've got that stable base, but you've also got that harmony and that symmetry in the line work. You've also got shape, which is shape to anything 2D. Tends to be used a lot more sort of in modern art. So obviously you've got like your Picasso, your Mondrian. Here you can kind of see how shape has been used on the floor there. It's just quite harmonious, quite symmetrical. Then you've got form. So form is your 3D, so that can be either implied or it can be physical. So your physical would be a sculpture, your implied would be, there's a lot of form in here, so it's just how things are shaded, how things are created to give that 3D appearance. Texture would be your sort of, again, that could be physical or implied, so you can kind of see the texture here, like how that's all, you can kind of tell that that's cloth by the texture and the way that that's painted. And then you've got space. So in this, so we are going to talk about space a bit more, but you've obviously got your foreground, your midground and your background, so you can kind of see how the scale sort of decreases in size, and you really are sort of focused on this midground here. Also in design we talk a lot about positive and negative space, which is kind of, obviously a positive space is occupied by any sort of design work, colour. Your negative space is in design. I've actually got an example here of, hang on. So Fashion Revolution, it's one of my inspirations, really big on sustainable fashion, making something new from something old, which is again a little bit of something what we're doing. So you can kind of see here you've got like the positive space with the detail, and then you've got the negative space here, which just really sort of shows off that and it makes it pop. Then you've got colour, so in here, so you've got sort of like obviously the reds and greens. So in art, colour tends to be a bit more symbolic. Design, it's a bit more sort of aesthetic, sort of colour psychology. But we've got kind of the reds here sort of indicate love, so it's almost like that maternal love that's focusing on, because Mary tends to be painted in blue quite often, but here it's actually chosen to focus on that maternal love. And you've got green threaded throughout, which symbolises new life. So again, you've just got like love and life and harmony in that painting. And then value would be kind of like your light and dark shades, so like it's just your shadow, sort of obviously white being the lightest, black being the darkest. So that's generally kind of a brief overview of the 7 elements of art. So what we're going to do is sort of choose, so because obviously we're making something new from something old and it's collage. One of the reasons for collage is because before Photoshop and Adobe and all that sort of software, like designers did used to use collage to kind of create imagery. So if anyone's seen Grace Jones' albums covers, like you'll see that sort of like the way that they've been edited, it's kind of old school Photoshop really. So you don't need a big budget, you can still be creative and you can kind of still experiment and create new sort of imagery and new designs, and even if you don't have that software. So yeah, so I'm going to sort of focus on 3 different elements and sort of dissect the piece. So whether or not you want to focus on the figures, whether or not you want to sort of focus on sort of like pattern and the tiles, also things in the foreground you might actually want to bring forward. So it's all about sort of what you want to focus on really, because then we're going to sort of like draw them out, cut them out, and then rearrange them into a design. So I've got a little example here. So that was just kind of like a little rough one that I done yesterday. Yours will probably be a lot neater, because you can rewatch this video afterwards as well if you want to have a little bit more time. So for me, again, this is an example. So this is Andrew Todd. So you can kind of see here, so obviously this is Photoshop, but you've got like them original drawings, and then the way that he's put them together, obviously this is like, probably like you would photocopy something, cut it out and sort of stick it, but then you've got this pattern that's been created. And also when we talk about collage, you've got like the kind of old school scrapbook sort of style, so things like Sex Pistols. It's actually a lot of really great examples in pop culture and in music. So always really inspired by that when I was younger, and I think that's kind of what's drawn me towards that kind of style. But yeah, you've got the Sex Pistols, Anarchy in the UK there as well. And just as another example, got this, which actually was at the Bose Museum, so it was the Yves Saint Laurent exhibition, and we've got this jacket here, this gorgeous jacket, and I don't know if anyone recognises it, but it's actually Van Gogh. So I've actually got a close-up here as well. So it's that kind of idea of how art can cross into design, so you can kind of see a close-up there. It's like beautiful embellishment work. So what I'm going to do, so the things that I've decided to focus on is St. Luke. So I've kind of sketched these out, but I'm obviously going to draw over them. So the first thing that you're going to focus on is your line work. So for me, like my general style tends to be quite graphic. You can kind of see a little bit by my embroidery and the samples here. I'm not a really sketchy person, but if like this is all about doing this in your style, so you're reimagining bouts. So obviously if you want to kind of draw a bit more illustrative and a little bit more sketchy, then do that. If you want to kind of stylize it, so in design, stylizing would be actually if you want to kind of simplify or kind of add extra embellishments, so you can actually sort of change it and alter it. So don't be scared to be creative with it. If you want to kind of, for example, another piece that I'm choosing to focus on is element of print and the element of texture. So I've actually decided to do leopard print as a background, even though there isn't leopard print on the picture. Like, it's still obviously influenced, but sort of by some of the elements that I'm choosing, but I'm actually just putting my own spin on that. So I'm just gonna start drawing that now. So one of the things that I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, is the things that you'll need. So obviously take a minute if you do need to go and get them. You'll need some paper. I'd recommend one that's not too heavy, because obviously when you're sticking it down it's going to lie a lot flatter. Need a pair of scissors. I'd bring these in especially because like 90% of the scissors in here are fabric scissors, and if anyone knows anyone in textiles, it's like you don't want to get them mixed up. And glue stick, and ideally a pencil, or you can just, oh thanks, love a bit of leopard print. But yeah, so if you want to just go straight in with a fine liner, then feel free to do that too. So I don't know, I'm just going to shuffle here because so you can kind of see. So this is just like a general sort of sketch that I've done, but again, the idea of this is like you can actually sort of draw on top and you can change it, and then say you got some tracing paper and you want to do that again, like that's how you develop a design, is like to keep sort of, you just keep refining it and refining it. So if anyone's seen any of my portrait t-shirts, you'll know that I was definitely going to get a figure in there. So I'm going to sort of stick to kind of like the robes that he's wearing. Might change the colours. So again, when you're thinking about the colours, it's like, when you're thinking like in a design way, it's like there's loads of different colour theories. So you've got obviously like complementary colours, you've got, so complementary would be if you've got like opposite sides of the colour wheel, so it would be your yellows and purples, your oranges and blues, like your reds and greens. So you can kind of see actually on the Bouts painting, you can see that it's actually using complementary colours, like it's like reds and greens. So it's a really nice balance there. Whereas you can also have monochromatic, which is different shades of the same colour. You can have compound colour palette, which is it's the same as like complementary, but you've got two shades the same and one opposite the colour on the other side of the colour wheel. And you've also got triadic, which is 3 colours which are kind of equal distance around the colour wheel. So if you don't know if you haven't seen a colour wheel, sort of you can Google it quite easily. It's so obviously you've got your primary colours and then your secondary colours in between them. And when you're choosing what to draw, I would recommend not having things that are kind of all like quite similar in size, like experiment with scale. So obviously for this I'm going to increase the size, so I'm doing the archway in the back and I'm making that a little bit bigger. But as you noticed with the leopard print, it's kind of going like, it's quite like a long piece, and when it comes to the composition, it's going to be a lot easier to work with than having 3 things that are like the same size. Like you've actually got more options if you have a little bit more variety. So I'm just gonna, I can see that. So again, just stylising this, it's really simple. It's actually said as well that that in the, oh thanks Jess. So I feel like with this as well, it's said that this is actually Derek Bouts' studio. So I'm drawing St Luke, but some people have said self-portrait, so you can actually see the side here is like you can see that artist studio. So it's quite an intimate look, especially for like a religious painting. It's like you've actually got this kind of intimacy here. So it's almost like reimagining bouts, it's actually redrawn bouts. And what I do like to do, so I'm choosing to stylise this here. So all the creases you can see are really angular, and I'm actually sort of just choosing to add sort of like extra little bits. So when I come to apply the colour, the more sort of like little details like this that you've got to work with, like the easier it's going to be to sort of balance out. So I'm only going to do that with a few. So there we go. So there's the first one. Just quite simplified. Like I say, you might want to do continuous line where you don't lift your pen off the paper. You might decide to do it kind of like a broken line, sort of like actually like sketch it out properly. But yeah, that's how I would tend to draw things. So I'm gonna do the archway next, which, like I say, is a lot bigger than the original scale. So I just want to play around with scale, just sort of give it a different feel. And I feel like it's really beautiful, but it really is in the background, and I want to bring that forward. So again, and when you're filling in, it's all like, so for example, I'm doing these pillars here. Like these are actually marble, and you can kind of see the texture like on the paint in there. So you might actually want to add your own sort of texture in there. Like you might want to, it doesn't have to be marble, like you could add whatever you want in there. So I'm just gonna finish the sort of scenery in here. Just think, yeah, that tree in the centre is really nice. If you can hear traffic, we're right above some buses, so you might hear a little bit of background noise there. Yeah, so then there's my little archway there. Again, so just for scale, you can kind of see that it's a lot bigger than the original. And I'm going to do the leopard print. So for the colour, because I really wanted to keep this quite open, it's like with it being like design based and things like that, like I didn't want to restrict people to like just using pencils or just using pastels or just using pens. So whatever you want to apply the colour with, it could be paints or anything, use whatever medium you feel comfortable with, and I think it'll be really nice to see that variation of like everyone's own style, like using this technique. So I actually really like drawing leopard print as well. It's just quite, you can just sort of be quite organic with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just gonna quickly finish this off. The thing is, once you've like stuck things down as well, like once you've got your composition done and you're happy with that, like you can actually add things. You can still just draw on top of that. You can add some text if you want to add some text. It's totally up to you. Right, so got my leopard print done as well. That's done. So next thing you want to do is you want to cut these out. So, I mean, you could go old school collage style, you could actually rip it if you want that kind of look, or you can cut really neatly around it. Or you can just be a bit more geometric. And I'm just going to do it sort of like geometric, it's a lot faster. And I actually quite like the look of it as well. And you can always cut more off as well. So if you do it like this and you don't like it, or when you start to overlay them, there's like a big bit of white paper sort of covering part of your design, you can always just cut around that. Right, okay, so that's the 3 pieces cut out there. So next thing that I want to do, I've got a slightly bigger bit of paper here. I want to rearrange them. So you can just have a good play around before you stick them down. So like with the leopard print, obviously that I'm going to put that down first, like it makes a nice backdrop. If you sort of look at how pattern has been used here as well, you can see it does have like sort of like the sort of form and the figures in front of the patterns, so thanks Evie. So I'm gonna, I think, have this coming out. So this is where you're going to start to think about space. So again, like think of that negative space, that Fashion Revolution cover. Sort of, do you want to fill the whole area, or do you want to kind of just keep it so that's quite simple. So we've got that to start with there. And also in design we tend to work in odd numbers, so I would choose like 3 elements or 5 elements, or 7, obviously it depends on the size of your paper and how big your design is, but it just tends to work a bit better than an odd number for some reason, than an even number even. So yeah, I quite enjoy these kind of grouped together, sort of like this, where there's actually a little bit of space around them, rather than have them all together like that. I just think having that there, like I like to work diagonally, and I think you get a really nice balance of that. So I'm gonna start sticking these down now that I'm happy with where they're at. You can always cut bits off as well, so even like something like that, it could be like, oh no, it's a bit too long or whatever, just kind of cut around it. Like, don't feel like you have to stick with the same thing. Right, so I'm just going to do this. And I quite like how the sort of like the end sort of tapers off like up there as well. So obviously I'm just doing this quite roughly, but you might want to, oh thanks Nikki. I've actually realised that I've reversed the layout, but it's the same but the other way around. Yeah, so I'm just doing this roughly, but you might want to stick it down better, just make sure your edges are properly down. Especially if you're going to be painting, because that'll make a big difference. I'm going to be using markers, so it's a little bit tidier and easier to control. So once you've got your layout, as I say, this is quite rough. Like, you might want to stick it down properly, but you can kind of see how you've got something that is like quite traditional, but something that's also like clearly influenced by that, but it's actually done in a much more contemporary way. So once you've got that, you want to choose your colours. So like before I mentioned, you might decide to go monochromatic, you might decide to do sort of like similar tones, or you might decide, you've inspired me to do more collage. Third degree of textiles, yeah, of course, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I did my degree in textiles too, so that's like perfect. So yeah, I've got a couple of examples here. So these are just using the markers that I've got. So you can kind of see here, you've got like the monochromatic there. It's all kind of like the same sort of tone, but like in different shades. Or the same shade, sorry, but in different tones. You've got sort of like complementary colours, so you would have like your green and red. I actually really like this together as well. You've got that kind of like greeny blue and that kind of corally sort of pink. Thanks, yeah, I love pink. I don't know if anyone's noticed, if anyone's seen my Instagram, know that I really do love pink. So I think actually, even though the last one I done sort of complementary colours, I think I might actually go monochromatic. Or even compound. I might actually go like the reds and then have the blue as a pop, because I think sometimes it's nice to have something that balances it out. So you could go, depending on the colour palette that you do, you might have sort of, say like up to 5-6 colours. Like make sure you've got like a light colour, a dark colour. It's always nice to have a colour pop in there as well. So I'm just gonna look at which colours I've got. So I think these three here, yeah. So I've got the red, the coral and the light pink. And then it's like a pastel green. So start off with the green, because with that being the colour pop, that's where your eye's going to get drawn to first. And then you can kind of work around that. So I'm just going to use it as a highlight. So again, just make sure it's in the frame. Yeah, it's a lovely blue, isn't it? It's really fresh. Even though it says it's green, it's definitely blue. So what I want to do, so again, I'm sort of working diagonally and sort of just bringing the colour across. So I might decide to do it a lot more heavy down here. And sort of imagine you're sort of threading the colour through. So I'm just kind of going to go for the cuffs and the sort of shapes in the folds at the bottom. So you can kind of see, I don't know how well it's actually shown up on the camera there, but you can kind of see how balanced that is there. If anyone is sort of wanting to get into design, obviously there's like loads of different things you can use. I would say like pro markers and Tria pens are really, really good. You can get, obviously with Tria markers, you can get Pantone colours, which is like a universal colour code. They just blend really, really nicely. Like you don't get the same sort of lines as if you colour in with felt tips or Sharpie pens. It's like you get much nicer colours as well. So next I'm gonna go with sort of the mid-tones. So I've got sort of like the light pink and the coral. And I think what I'm gonna do, like, you don't have to colour the whole thing as well. Like, I mean, personally, if anyone's seen my t-shirts, like my portrait t-shirts, I like to do black and white with just a few colours. Sometimes that can be more effective. Obviously, some people might like the more the better. It just totally depends on your style, really. But I think for me, I do like to keep it quite minimal. And again, when you're colouring in, like, it doesn't have to be like a solid block colour. like if you're using paints or pastels or anything like that, you can kind of blend colours. I mean, actually what I'm deciding to do here is just to kind of like not kind of fill the whole thing in, kind of leave that tiny bit of white border. So if anyone's kind of seen David Shrigley's drawings, I really love how he kind of does things that are so simple, but they're sort of really quite attention grabbing. It's like that naive style, but it's just so perfect. Can even see what I'm doing here. So you can kind of see there, like what I mean by the markers, like how it blends. Like you're not getting that kind of felt tip marker line that you would usually get. So I'm just gonna do that. I think these colours go really well together as well. So obviously that's like a big block of colour there. Might actually just kind of break it up a little bit more for the marble in here. So I'm literally just doing like a spiral, just like a really simple spiral sort of down there. And I think I'm going to fill that top bar in as well. Like that. So I'm actually start to sort of like tie that into the leopard print. I think this is going to be the main colour. So again, you can just balance it out, like you can have it heavier on one side and sort of taper it off. I think I'm actually just going to pick these smaller bits just to pick up on. So and I think with the leopard print, to be honest, that is where I'm going to add most of the sort of different colours. I think that would just work really well to kind of have that a little bit more multicoloured. So I've also got the red here. I'm going to use this with caution because it is quite dark. You can see there. Because it's so dark, like it's quite a strong colour. If I put like even just that little bit, you can kind of see the balance sort of goes towards there a lot more. So you can imagine just if I filled in one area like that, it would just completely sort of make that side seem a lot heavier. So I'm just going to use it quite sparingly. I mean, for colour palettes, someone else who actually really inspires me is like the Memphis design group. So you'll see like a lot of the installation art that you see on Instagram at the minute is like Museum of Ice Cream, all that kind of thing. Is it's all that kind of like black and white bold lines, sort of like bright colours, like big blocks of pink and blues and things like that. But yeah, they've got some really gorgeous designs and really beautiful colours, so I'll definitely check them out. I've also got Grayson Perry. Again, like just looking at composition and looking at colour, like the colours in here are gorgeous. They're not really expected, but he's used like I mean the red, yellow and purple, it's quite a nice mix. It's like that orangey red. But I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to Grayson Perry's work is because he does kind of manage to blend craft and, love Grayson Perry. Yeah, he does manage to blend like craft and art in a really accessible way. And again, for colours, and it's quite unusual that this is a similar sort of colour palette to Bouts, but it's Andy Warhol. And again, like for use of colour, like he's got just like some gorgeous examples on his screen prints. You can kind of see the cover there, Mick Jagger. So just gonna actually for these, because I do want to add the red, but I don't want to fill the colours in like too much, just because it's so kind of harsh. And you can kind of see there, I'm starting to like draw over the line. You can kind of see the black there where the collage finishes, but I'm kind of bringing it out. So you can kind of draw straight onto your background there. And yep, and then I'm just going to add some of the light pink, and then that's it. So just going to do the trees. Again, just leaving some bits white there because I think it just kind of brings the focus more onto the pieces that are coloured. So fill in his drawing pad, which does look suspiciously like an iPad. So I'm gonna, yeah, this is a little bit brighter actually than the coral. It just kind of lifts it a little bit. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of how you might look at a piece of artwork and use it as inspiration and make it into a new piece of work. So there we go. And I think I'm quite happy with that as a rough design. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and so I've got a couple of notes just for obviously anyone that's watching. So this is it's aimed at young people. If you are the age between 13 and 25, there's 23 creativity packs to give away. But what you have to do is to go onto the Bose Museum website, and you go, it's so if you click on Learn, go to young people, then Bouts Art School, and it's week 2. Then you can fill in the evaluation form, and in the kit includes oil pastels, scissors, Pritt stick, pencil, fine liner, paper, and PDF handout instructions. So you get quite a lot in the kit, so that's great. This video will be available on the Bose Museum website and also on the Instagram TV if you want to rewatch it. There's also the PDF instructions on there too, and if you do sort of want to upload your work and share it, there's a hashtag that we're using as Bouts Art School, so you can kind of see everyone else's work on there, sort of just through the weeks of what everyone's doing. And next week is Storytelling Through Photography with Rachel McGiven, and yeah, so that's it from me, and thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with.